A 4-year-old homeless girl finds a millionaire passed out in the middle of the road as cars swerve around him. But she saw everything and did something that shocked everyone. Comment giving a rating from 0 to 10. For my story, your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. The relentless sun beat down on the dusty streets of Harmony Creek, a small town in rural Pennsylvania, where the December heat felt like it was melting even the most resilient hopes. Near the highway that cut through the town, a tiny figure moved among the cars, stopped at a traffic light, extending a dirty little hand in search of some coins. Willow was 4 years old, but her frail, malnourished appearance made her look like she was only 2. Her brown hair was matted and dirty, her clothes were just rags that barely covered her thin little body, and her big eyes carried a sadness too deep for such a small child. She had learned very early on that survival depended on her ability to awaken pity in the hurried drivers who passed by daily. On that sweltering afternoon, when the clock on the central square struck 3, Willow was walking along the sidewalk of Main Street when the roar of an engine caught her attention. A black BMW, gleaming under the scorching sun, approached at high speed. Behind the wheel was Harrison Blake, a 30-year-old man who looked like he had stepped straight out of the pages of a magazine. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his face had striking features that resembled a matinee idol, and his athletic build revealed hours of gym and personal care. Harrison owned Blake Enterprises, a regional company that had provided him with a considerable fortune through smart investments in the stock market. His net worth in dollars was constantly growing, and he had diversified his investments into real estate funds and even some cryptocurrencies. At that moment, however, his wealth and success couldn't help him with what was about to happen. Harrison had felt a strange pressure in his chest for a few minutes, but had ignored the discomfort, attributing it to business stress. Suddenly, a piercing pain shot through his heart like an icy blade. His vision began to darken at the edges. His hands trembled on the steering wheel, and before he could react, he completely lost consciousness. The out-of-control car skidded on the road, crossed the median, and crashed violently into a utility pole. The crash echoed down the avenue, but the passing drivers only slowed down to observe the wreckage before speeding away again, each absorbed in their own problems and commitments. Willow, who had witnessed the entire scene from across the street, felt her little heart race. Despite her young age and the hardships she had faced in life, she had been raised by her grandmother, Beatrice, a kind lady who had always taught her about the importance of helping others, even when one has very little to offer. Without hesitating, the girl ran across the busy street, dodging the cars that honked angrily. When she got close to the destroyed BMW, she saw Harrison unconscious, with his head lolling to the side and a small amount of blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. Remembering Beatrice's teachings about first aid, Willow looked for some pebbles on the ground and carefully placed them under Harrison's head, raising it slightly to prevent him from choking on his own saliva. Her small hands trembled as she touched the stranger's face, checking if he was still breathing. The minutes seemed like hours, until the distant sound of ambulance sirens finally approached. When the paramedics arrived and saw the scene, they were impressed to discover that such a small child had provided the correct first aid, possibly saving the man's life. Willow quietly stepped away as the professionals worked, watching from a distance as Harrison was placed on the stretcher and taken to the hospital. No one noticed when she disappeared into the shadows of the buildings, returning to her life on the streets as if nothing had happened, carrying with her only the hope that the handsome man would be okay. 3 days passed before Harrison finally opened his eyes in the private room of St. Luke's Hospital, the most modern in the region. His head throbbed as if thousands of hammers were banging simultaneously against his skull, and the white light from the ceiling seemed to pierce his eyes like sharp blades. Beside him, his wife, Tiffany, was sitting in a leather armchair, fidgeting nervously with her cell phone. She was a 28-year-old woman, platinum blonde, with delicate features that hid a fierce ambition. Her designer dress and expensive jewelry contrasted drastically with the hospital atmosphere, as if she were at a social event instead of watching over her husband. When Harrison tried to move, a sharp pain shot through his chest, causing him to groan softly. Tiffany looked up from her phone, but her expression did not show the relief expected of a worried wife. "Finally awake," she said in a tone more annoyed than affectionate. "Do you have any idea of the mess you've caused? The newspapers won't stop calling. The company is a mess, and I had to cancel the trip to Miami we've been planning for months." Harrison tried to speak, but his throat was as dry as sandpaper. A nurse entered the room at that moment, followed by Dr. Simon Reynolds, the cardiologist in charge of the case. The doctor was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a serious demeanor that did not promise good news. "Mr. Blake, it's a relief to see you conscious," said the doctor, consulting his clipboard. "I need to talk to you about your condition. What happened was an episode of severe cardiac arrhythmia, caused by a congenital condition that apparently was never diagnosed." Harrison felt his stomach drop. He had always considered himself a healthy man, exercised regularly, and had annual checkups. How could something like this have gone unnoticed? "Doctor, does this mean it can happen again?" he asked with a still, hoarse voice. Dr. Reynolds nodded gravely. "Unfortunately, yes. Your condition is called hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy. It is a rare disease that can cause sudden collapses at any time, especially in stressful situations. We will need more tests to determine the appropriate treatment, but I cannot guarantee that episodes like this will not recur." Tiffany paled when she heard these words, but not for her husband's health. Her calculating mind was already processing the financial implications of having a sick husband. How would she maintain her luxurious lifestyle if Harrison could no longer work? How would she explain to her friends in local high society that her perfect marriage was threatened by an illness? Harrison, on the other hand, was thinking about something completely different. "Doctor, I was told that someone helped me at the accident site. Do you know who it was?" The doctor smiled for the first time since entering the room. "Ah, yes. According to the paramedics, it was a little child who provided first aid. She placed some stones under your head to keep your airway clear. It was a very intelligent attitude for someone so young. Probably saved your life." "A child?" Harrison repeated, intrigued. "How so? Where are her parents?" The paramedic who was present at the scene, named Dave, had left some information with the medical team. According to him, the child seemed to be a street kid, alone and apparently abandoned. She had disappeared before they could talk to her properly. This information struck Harrison like lightning. An abandoned child had saved his life, while dozens of adults simply drove by, completely ignoring the situation. What kind of world was this, where an unprotected child demonstrated more compassion than supposedly civilized people? Tiffany rolled her eyes at her husband's growing interest in the subject. "Harrison, don't start with these romantic ideas about gratitude and good Samaritanism. You need to focus on your recovery and business. The company can't go without direction for too long." But Harrison barely listened to his wife's words. His mind was completely absorbed by the image of this mysterious child who, without even knowing him, had risked her own safety to save him. He felt an urgent, almost desperate need to find her and thank her personally. It was as if his own life depended on this meeting. At that moment, his business partner Wesley Clark entered the room without knocking, carrying a stack of documents and wearing his usual expression of someone who was eternally stressed. Wesley was a 42-year-old man, too thin, with thinning hair and small eyes that seemed to be always calculating some financial advantage. He had been Harrison's minority partner for 5 years, always resentful of not having a larger share in the company's profits. "Harrison, thank God you're okay," he said, but his tone did not sound sincere. "We have serious problems. The accident was news in the local media, and some customers are questioning the stability of the company. We need a statement from you saying that you are fully recovered, otherwise we may lose the city contract worth $2 million. Harrison observed Wesley with a clarity he had never experienced before. The accident had changed something fundamental in his perspective on life and the people around him. Suddenly, he could see through the masks that everyone wore, perceiving the true motivations behind every word and gesture. "Business can wait, Wesley," he said calmly. "Now I have something much more important to do. I need to find the child who saved me." Wesley and Tiffany exchanged worried glances upon hearing Harrison's words. It was evident that the accident had affected more than just his physical heart. Something had changed deeply in his mind and priorities. Tiffany approached the bed with a forced smile, trying to use her usual charm to dissuade him from this absurd idea. "Honey, you're being irrational," she said, running her perfectly manicured hand through her husband's hair. "You just woke up from a coma. You have a multi-million-dollar company to manage, stock investments that need constant supervision, and you're thinking of looking for some random street kid. That doesn't make sense." Harrison gently pushed away his wife's hand, his dark eyes fixed on the white ceiling of the hospital. "It makes perfect sense to me, Tiffany. This child saved my life when no one else cared to stop. She deserves at least a proper thank you." Wesley shifted uncomfortably in the chair, his fingers drumming nervously on the documents he had brought. "Harrison, be realistic. You have responsibilities. Blake Enterprises employs more than 200 people. Your investment funds generate dividends for dozens of families who have trusted you. You can't just abandon all of this for a sentimental whim." Irritation began to grow in Harrison's chest. It was amazing how the people around him could only think in financial terms, as if money and profit were the only important things in life. "It's not a whim, Wesley. It's a matter of gratitude and humanity, concepts that you seem to have completely forgotten." Dr. Reynolds intervened diplomatically, noticing the growing tension in the room. "Mr. Blake, I believe that your determination to find this child may be part of the process of emotional recovery after a trauma like the one you experienced. However, I need to warn you that your cardiac condition requires absolute rest for the next few days. Any physical exertion or emotional stress can trigger another episode." Harrison nodded, but his resolution remained unshaken. "Doctor, how long do I need to stay in the hospital?" "At least a week for observation and medication adjustment. After that, you can be discharged, but with severe restrictions on physical and emotional activity." As soon as the doctor left, Tiffany exploded in a fit of irritation that she had been suppressing since the beginning of the conversation. "Harrison, this is ridiculous. Are you willing to risk your health and our financial future because of some brat who probably doesn't even remember you anymore? Think about our marriage, the life we've built together." Harrison observed his wife with a coldness she had never seen before. "What life, Tiffany? A life where the only goal is to accumulate more money, buy more expensive cars, travel to more exclusive places. A life where we don't have children because you consider it inconvenient for your socialite career. A life where we can't even have a conversation that doesn't involve figures in dollars." The words hit Tiffany like slaps in the face. She had married Harrison 3 years ago, not for love, but for the financial security he represented. The daughter of a lower-middle-class family, she had met Harrison when he was still just a starting builder, but she had seen the potential for growth in him and decided to invest in the relationship as if it were a long-term application. Now, seeing her shares plummeting, she felt panic. "How can you say that to me?" she cried, tears of anger welling up in her eyes. "I have dedicated the best years of my life to supporting your career, to being the perfect wife that your clients and partners expected to see by your side." Wesley tried to ease the situation, realizing that the discussion was harming his own interests. "Listen, we don't need to fight. Harrison, I understand your gratitude, but how about offering a cash reward to whoever finds this child? We can publish an ad in the local newspaper offering, say, $5,000. That way you demonstrate your gratitude without exposing yourself unnecessarily. Wesley's suggestion revealed exactly the kind of mentality that was beginning to disgust Harrison. Everything always came down to money, as if human problems could be solved simply by throwing bills on the table. "You don't understand," he said calmly, but with a firmness that made both of them recoil. "It's not about money. It's about human connection, about recognizing the value of an act of pure kindness. This child saved me without expecting anything in return, without even knowing me. That's worth more than all my assets." Tiffany crossed her arms, her expression becoming glacial. "Very well, Harrison, if that's your priority, maybe it's time to rethink our relationship. I didn't get married to be the wife of a crazy philanthropist who put strangers above his own family." The veiled threat of divorce should have frightened Harrison, but he felt only a strange relief. It was as if a veil had been lifted from his eyes, allowing him to see clearly the kind of person he had married. "Do what you think is best, Tiffany," he replied serenely. "But my decision is made. As soon as I am discharged, I will find this girl." Wesley realized that he would completely lose control over Harrison if he didn't act quickly. His calculating mind began to work on a strategy to discredit him, perhaps claiming that the accident had affected his judgment. If he could convince some doctors to declare Harrison mentally unstable, he could temporarily take control of the company and, who knows, make this situation permanent. "Harrison," he said with false concern, "don't you think this obsession might be a symptom of some neurological problem caused by the accident? Maybe you should talk to a psychiatrist before making important decisions." The insinuation was subtle, but Harrison perfectly captured the message. Wesley was trying to question his sanity to gain an advantage over the company. It was impressive how people revealed their true nature in times of crisis. "My mind has never been so clear, Wesley," he replied with an ironic smile. "In fact, I think the accident cured me of a blindness that lasted for years. Now I can perfectly see who the people around me are, around." The discomfort in the room was palpable. Tiffany and Wesley realized that they had lost all influence over Harrison, and that despaired them. Both depended financially on him in different ways. She through marriage, he through partnership in the company, and seeing him escape their control was like watching a vault being closed right in front of their noses. That night, alone in his hospital room after the departure of his unwanted visitors, Harrison stared out the window at the city lights. Somewhere in those dark streets, a special child was facing hardships that he couldn't even imagine. A child who had demonstrated more compassion in a few minutes than many people demonstrated in a lifetime. He knew that finding her wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that he wouldn't have peace until he could look into her eyes and express his gratitude properly. It was as if his heart, already physically fragile, couldn't bear the weight of the emotional debt he carried. A week after being discharged from the hospital, Harrison began his search for the girl who had saved his life, defying all medical advice about rest. His first attempts were methodical and organized, starting with the most obvious spots in town where street children usually panhandled. He visited the central square, the busy traffic lights, the bus station, and even the farmers' market that took place on Saturdays in downtown Harmony Creek. During these first days, Harrison discovered a world that had always existed right under his nose, but that his privileged life had never allowed him to truly see. There were dozens of abandoned children living on the streets of the town, each with their own story of abandonment, neglect, or family tragedy. Some had fled abusive homes, others were simply left behind by parents who had no means or interest in raising them. What impressed Harrison the most was how these children had developed a complex survival network, taking care of each other with a loyalty that he rarely saw among adults in his business life. He spoke with a boy of approximately 7 years old named Cody, who had become a kind of informal leader of the group that lived near the abandoned train depot. Cody had dirty blonde hair and blue eyes that seemed too old for his age, carrying a precocious wisdom acquired through suffering. When Harrison described the girl he was looking for, small, frail, appearing to be only 2 years old, Cody immediately knew who he was talking about. "You're talking about Willow," said Cody, chewing on a piece of bread that he had probably found in the trash of some bakery. "She used to hang out near the traffic light on Main Street, but no one has seen her there for a few days." Harrison's heart leapt upon hearing the name. Willow. Finally, his savior had a name, a real identity. "Do you know where she might be now?" he asked, trying to control the anxiety in his voice. Cody studied him suspiciously. In his experience, well-dressed adults who asked questions about street children rarely had good intentions. "Why do you want to know? Are you a cop, social worker?" "No, I'm none of that," Harrison replied honestly. "She helped me when I needed it, and now I want to return the favor." The boy considered this answer for a few moments before deciding that Harrison seemed sincere. "Willow is different from the other kids," he explained. "She doesn't really like to be in a group. She prefers to hide in places where she can be alone. Sometimes we see her under the overpass that's on the edge of town near the creek." Harrison thanked Cody and gave him $50, more money than the boy had probably ever seen together in his entire life. Cody's eyes widened, and he quickly hid the bills inside his torn shirt. "Mister," he said before Harrison walked away, "be careful. Willow is skittish. If you come on too strong or fast, she'll run away and won't trust you anymore." The advice sounded like ancient wisdom coming from someone who had learned about trust and betrayal the hard way. Harrison spent the next 2 days searching for the overpass mentioned by Cody, but without success. The location was a concrete structure that passed over an almost dry creek, surrounded by dense vegetation and a lot of accumulated trash. It was clearly a refuge for people that society preferred to pretend didn't exist: homeless people, drug addicts, and abandoned children. Meanwhile, Tiffany took advantage of her husband's frequent absence to meet secretly with Wesley at the construction company office. The two had discovered that they had more in common than they imagined. Both were desperate to maintain control over Harrison's fortune and willing to do anything for it. "He's completely obsessed with this child," complained Tiffany, pouring herself a glass of imported whiskey from the office's private bar. "Yesterday, he came home at 11 at night, covered in mud, talking about overpasses and street children. This isn't normal, Wesley." Wesley agreed with a dark nod. "I've already discreetly talked to some doctors about the possibility that he is suffering from some kind of post-traumatic psychological disorder. If we can get a medical evaluation that declares his temporary mental incapacity, I can take over the management of the company until he recovers." "And if he never recovers from this obsession?" asked Tiffany, her eyes gleaming with a calculating malice. "Well, in that case, you would continue to manage the company indefinitely, and I would continue to be his dedicated wife, taking care of his best financial interests." The conspiracy between the two was solidifying, fueled by greed and the fear of losing access to the wealth that had become the center of their existences. They agreed to start spreading subtle rumors about Harrison's mental state among clients and employees of the company, preparing the ground for an eventual legal intervention. On the 3rd day of searching for the overpass, Harrison finally found more concrete clues. An elderly lady who lived in a house near the creek told him that she had seen a very small girl drinking water from the creek during the early hours of the morning. The description matched perfectly with Willow's. "Poor thing," said the lady, shaking her head sadly, "so small to be alone in the world. I've tried to give her food a few times, but she's very distrustful. She grabs the food and runs away like a frightened little animal." Harrison felt his heart tighten at imagining Willow living in such precarious conditions, drinking potentially contaminated water, and hiding from the people who were trying to help her. What kind of experiences had she lived through to become so distrustful of adults? He decided that he needed a different strategy to approach her. The next morning, Harrison arrived at the overpass before dawn, carrying a bag with fresh bagels, bottled water, and some children's clothes that he had bought. He found a strategic spot behind some trees where he could observe without being seen. And then he simply waited. Hours passed without a sign of the girl. The sun was already high when he finally saw her. Willow emerged cautiously from a hole between the stones of the overpass, looking nervously in all directions before heading to the creek. Even from afar, Harrison could see how she was even thinner and dirtier than he had imagined. Her clothes were just rags that barely covered her fragile little body. Upon seeing her drink water directly from the creek with her hands, Harrison had to control the impulse to run to her and take her immediately to a safe place. He remembered Cody's advice about not scaring her and forced himself to remain hidden, only observing and learning about her habits. That's when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Willow was talking to herself, gesturing animatedly as if she was talking to someone that only she could see. Her movements were nervous, almost frenetic, and from time to time she looked over her shoulder with terror in her eyes, as if she was being chased by something invisible. Harrison spent 3 consecutive days observing Willow from afar, establishing a routine that allowed him to study the girl's behavior patterns without scaring her. He discovered that she emerged from her hiding place always at the same morning hour, drank water from the creek, searched for food scraps among the accumulated trash, and then disappeared again until the end of the afternoon. What worried him the most were the frequent episodes where she talked intensely with someone invisible, her big eyes fixed on empty points in the air as if she was being reprimanded or consoled by a ghostly presence. During these imaginary conversations, Willow alternated between melancholic smiles and expressions of pure terror, sometimes shrinking as if she was trying to protect herself from some threat that only existed in her traumatized mind. On the 4th morning, Harrison finally decided to attempt a direct approach, but in an extremely careful way. He arrived at the overpass, still in the dark, and left a small basket with fresh bagels, bottled water, and some fruits exactly in the place where Willow used to drink water. Then he hid at a considerable distance and waited. When the girl appeared and found the basket, her reaction was immediately of panic. She looked frantically in all directions, like a wild animal sniffing danger, and for a moment Harrison thought that she would run away without touching the food. But hunger was stronger than fear. Willow approached cautiously to the basket, grabbed some bagels and ran back to her hiding place. Harrison smiled sadly. It was progress, even if minimal. In the following days, he repeated the strategy, always leaving food and water in the same place, always keeping himself invisible. Gradually, Willow began to relax during these morning discoveries, even sitting next to the basket while eating, instead of taking everything running back to her refuge. It was during one of those mornings that Harrison heard for the first time what she was saying during her conversations with the air. Taking advantage of the favorable wind and his proximity, he managed to capture fragments of a conversation that made his heart break. "Grandma Beatrice, I tried to be good like you taught," Willow murmured, looking up as if she was talking to someone in the clouds. "I helped the man who was hurt, just like you said we should always help. But why did you have to leave? I'm so scared alone." Tears welled up in Harrison's eyes when he realized that the girl was talking to the memory of someone who had taken care of her before she ended up on the streets. Beatrice had been, apparently, the only maternal figure that Willow had known, and now she clung to those memories as the only source of guidance and comfort in a hostile world. "I know you said not to trust strangers," continued Willow, "but someone is leaving food for me. Do you think it's a good person? Sometimes I feel like showing up to say thank you, but I remember that you always said to be careful." Harrison made a decision at that moment. He could no longer remain hidden, watching the suffering of that extraordinary child who had saved his life. Slowly, very slowly, He came out from behind the trees and walked in Willow's direction, making enough noise so that she noticed his approach without getting completely scared. When Willow saw him, she jumped to her feet and prepared to run, but something on Harrison's face made her hesitate. Maybe it was the genuine kindness in his eyes, or the careful way he moved, but she remained still, trembling like a leaf in the wind. "Hi, Willow," said Harrison softly, stopping at a respectful distance. "My name is Harrison. I'm the man you helped on the road a few weeks ago." The girl's eyes widened with recognition. Even in her weakened state, she clearly remembered the accident and the handsome man who had passed out in the black car. "Are you okay now?" she asked with her thin little voice, demonstrating a genuine concern that deeply touched Harrison's heart. "I'm okay thanks to you," he replied, sitting on the ground to be at her height. "The doctors said that if you hadn't put those pebbles under my head, I could have died. You saved me." Willow lowered her eyes, embarrassed by the praise. "Grandma Beatrice taught me. She said that we should always help when someone is in need. Your grandma seems to have been a very wise person," said Harrison gently. "Where is she now?" Willow's face twisted with sadness. "She went to heaven when I was 3 years old. After that, I was alone." The devastating simplicity of this answer hit Harrison like a punch to the stomach. A 3-year-old child had become completely orphaned and had survived on the streets for an entire year, keeping herself alive through the kindness that a loving grandmother had taught her during the few years they had together. "Willow, are you hungry, thirsty? Do you need anything?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I'm always hungry," she admitted timidly. "But sometimes I can find food like this that someone leaves here for me." "That someone is me," revealed Harrison, seeing her eyes light up with surprise. "I've been looking for you for weeks to thank you for saving me." During the next hour, Harrison talked calmly with Willow, discovering fragments of her tragic story. She had lived with Beatrice in a small house on the outskirts of town until her grandmother's death. After that, some neighbors tried to take care of her for a few days, but they soon considered her a burden and abandoned her on the streets. Since then, she had learned to survive alone, sleeping in makeshift hiding places, drinking water from dubious sources, and eating what she could find or earn from pious people. "Willow," said Harrison carefully, "would you like to come to my house? There you would have a warm bed, food every day, clean clothes, and no one would ever leave you alone again." The girl studied him intensely, as if she was trying to read his soul through his eyes. There was something in her that transcended her young age, a capacity for perception that had probably been developed through the need for survival. "Do you have a big house?" she asked curiously. "I do, with a garden where you can play and rooms with soft beds. And you won't leave me alone like the other people did?" The question was asked with such vulnerability that Harrison felt like crying. "Never," he promised solemnly. "I promise I will never leave you alone again." Willow looked up as if consulting the invisible memory of Beatrice about this important decision. After a few moments, she nodded slowly. "Okay. But if you hurt me or leave me alone, I'll run away." "I would never do anything to hurt you," assured Harrison. "You saved me, remember. Now it's my turn to take care of you." When Harrison arrived home that afternoon, carrying Willow in his arms, she had fallen asleep in the car, exhausted by the emotional stress of the encounter. He found Tiffany waiting in the living room with a furious expression. Upon seeing the dirty, ragged child that her husband had brought into her impeccable home, she exploded in a fury that completely revealed her selfish nature. "You've completely lost it, Harrison. You're not bringing that street child into my house." Tiffany's fury echoed through the Blake mansion like thunder, waking Willow from the deep sleep in which she had fallen in Harrison's arms. The girl opened her big, scared eyes, immediately perceiving the hostility in the voice of the blonde woman who gestured violently in the elegant room. Harrison felt Willow's fragile little body tremble against his chest, and his determination to protect her intensified like never before. "Lower your voice, Tiffany," he said with cold authority. "You're scaring her." "Scaring her? And what do you think she's going to do to my house? Look at her, Harrison. She's dirty, probably full of diseases, and God knows what kind of wild behaviors she's learned living like an animal on the streets." Tiffany was so distraught that her mask of refinement had completely fallen, revealing the cruel and prejudiced woman she had always been beneath the facade of an exemplary wife. Willow huddled even closer in Harrison's arms, whispering so quietly that only he could hear, "She doesn't like me. Maybe it's better if I go back to my hiding place." "No," Harrison replied firmly, both to Willow and to Tiffany. "You're not going anywhere. This is your home now." Tiffany turned livid at seeing her husband defending a stranger against her. "Your home? Harrison, you've completely lost your mind. This is our home, built with our money, bought with profits from our investments. You can't just decide to turn it into an orphanage." "It's my house, Tiffany," Harrison corrected icily. "Bought with money from my company, registered only in my name. And if you can't accept an innocent child who needs help, maybe you're the one who should look for another place to live." The ultimatum left Tiffany momentarily speechless. She had never imagined that Harrison would be capable of threatening their marriage because of a street child. In her most pessimistic financial calculations, she had considered the possibility of divorce, but she had always imagined that she would be the one to make that decision, not the other way around. "You can't be serious," she stammered, her voice losing some of its previous aggression. "Are you willing to destroy our marriage for a complete stranger?" "This complete stranger saved my life," Harrison reminded her. "Something that my own wife didn't show much interest in preserving, considering that she spent more time worried about cancelled trips than about my recovery." The accusation hit Tiffany exactly where it hurt the most, in her guilty conscience. It was true that she had seen her husband's accident mainly through the prism of the personal inconveniences it would cause. But instead of reflecting on her behavior, she doubled down on aggression. "Fine," she said with venom in her voice. "But don't expect me to pretend to be a stepmother to some street urchin. And when your clients find out that you're sheltering a street child at home, when investors start to question your judgment, don't come crying to me when your precious fortune crumbles." Harrison carefully placed Willow on the sofa and approached Tiffany with an expression she had never seen before, a mixture of disgust and pity that made her recoil instinctively. "You know what I've discovered since the accident, Tiffany? That a 4-year-old abandoned child has more compassion and character than my own wife. That says a lot about the kind of person I chose to share my life with." The words were like slaps in Tiffany's face. Her entire identity was built on being desirable, on being the perfect wife that any rich man would want to show off. To see herself compared unfavorably to a dirty beggar was more humiliating than any direct insult. That night, while Harrison was helping Willow take her first hot bath in more than a year, Tiffany locked herself in her private office and made a call that would definitively change the course of events. "Wesley," she said when he answered, "we need to accelerate our plan. Harrison brought the child home. The situation is completely out of control." On the other end of the line, Wesley felt a mixture of alarm and opportunity. If Harrison was really losing his mind to the point of adopting an unknown street child, it would be much easier to convince authorities of his mental incapacity. "What child exactly?" he asked. "The girl he was looking for. A dirty, ragged urchin that he brought into our house as if she were a pet. He's talking about adopting her officially, Wesley. Can you imagine the scandal that's going to cause?" Wesley was starting to form a more elaborate plan. "Tiffany, you need to document everything that's happening. Record conversations of him talking about adoption. Take pictures of the child in your house. Note all the strange behaviors you observe. We'll use that as evidence that he's mentally unstable. And then we'll contact some doctor friends of mine and some local journalists. A story about a millionaire businessman who is having a nervous breakdown and putting strange children at risk will generate a lot of negative publicity. That may force him to accept voluntary psychiatric treatment, or at least create enough pressure for him to back down from this madness. While the two were conspiring on the phone, Harrison was living one of the most touching moments of his life. After the bath, he had given Willow one of his clean shirts to use as a nightgown, and now she was sitting on the bed in the guest room, slowly eating a bowl of warm soup. It was the first proper meal she had had in weeks. "The room is very pretty," she said timidly, looking around the room decorated with light wood furniture and yellow curtains. "You can change it the way you want," offered Harrison. "We can buy new furniture, toys, clothes, everything you need." Willow looked at him with an expression too old for her age. "Why are you being so good to me? Grandma Beatrice always said that when people are too kind for no reason, sometimes they want something bad." The distrust in the girl's voice broke Harrison's heart. What kind of experiences had she lived through to develop such caution at such a young age? "I don't want anything from you, Willow," he said sincerely. "I just want you to be happy and safe. You saved me when I needed it most, and now I want to do the same for you. But what if the angry woman doesn't like me living here?" Harrison sighed, knowing that he couldn't lie to her about the situation with Tiffany. Sometimes adults get confused and make bad choices. "But I promise you will always have a safe place to live, even if some things change." Willow nodded gravely, demonstrating a capacity for understanding that constantly impressed Harrison. It was clear that she had matured far beyond her 4 years due to the difficult circumstances she had faced. "Do you have children?" she asked suddenly. "No, I've never had children," admitted Harrison, "but I've always wanted to have them. And now I feel like you're my daughter at heart." The words came out naturally, and Harrison realized that they were completely true. In just a few hours of living with Willow, he had developed a protective instinct stronger than any feeling he had ever experienced. It was as if she had awakened in him a paternal part that he didn't even know existed. "Can I call you Daddy?" asked Willow hesitantly. "Of course you can," replied Harrison, his voice choked with emotion. "I would be very honored." When Willow finally fell asleep that night, nestled in clean and soft sheets for the first time in more than a year, Harrison remained sitting beside the bed, watching her breathe quietly. It was amazing how her presence had already completely changed his perspective on what really mattered in life. All his concerns about profits, investments, and assets seemed insignificant compared to the responsibility of protecting and caring for this extraordinary child. Willow's first days at the Blake mansion were a delicate mix of wonderful discoveries and growing tensions. The girl woke up every morning still distrusting that this reality could be just a cruel dream, timidly touching the soft sheets and looking around the decorated room as if fearing that everything would disappear at any moment. Harrison had hired a private pediatrician, Dr. Carolyn Shaw, to examine Willow and take care of her weakened health. The results were even worse than he had imagined. The girl was severely malnourished, anemic, and showed signs of psychological trauma that would require specialized follow-up for a long time. In addition, she had developed some peculiar behaviors that deeply worried the doctor. "Mr. Blake," explained Dr. Shaw after the examination, "Willow presents symptoms consistent with childhood post-traumatic stress. She constantly talks to people who don't exist, has episodes of night terror, and demonstrates a hypervigilance that is common in children who have lived through situations of constant danger." Harrison absorbed this information with a heavy heart. Will she recover with time? Physically, yes, with good nutrition and proper medical care. Emotionally, it will be a longer and more complex process. I recommend that you seek a child psychologist specializing in trauma. And prepare for difficult moments. Children in this situation often test the safety limits of their caregivers. As if to illustrate the doctor's point, that same night, Willow had her first episode of night terror in the house. Harrison was awakened by desperate screams coming from her room, finding the girl huddled in the corner of the bed, trembling violently and talking to someone invisible. "Don't leave me alone again, Grandma Beatrice," she screamed between sobs. "I promise I'll be good. I promise I won't be any trouble." Harrison approached carefully, remembering the doctor's instructions about not touching the child abruptly during these episodes. "Willow, you're safe," he said softly. "I'm here. Nothing will hurt you." Gradually, she came out of the state of panic, but continued talking to her deceased grandmother for a few more minutes before finally recognizing Harrison's presence. "Daddy Harrison?" "Grandma Beatrice was here. She was worried about me." "It was just a dream, honey," he consoled, sitting cautiously on the edge of the bed. "Your grandma loved you very much, and I'm sure she would be happy knowing that you're safe now." While Harrison was dealing with the challenges of caring for a traumatized child, Tiffany intensified her efforts to document what she considered evidence of her husband's mental instability. She had discreetly installed a recorder in his home office and was secretly photographing all the moments of affection between Harrison and Willow, planning to use these images to suggest that there was something inappropriate in the relationship. Wesley, in turn, had begun to spread carefully crafted rumors among the construction company's clients. He insinuated that Harrison was going through a psychological crisis after the accident, that he was making impulsive and dangerous decisions, and that he might no longer be reliable to manage multi-million-dollar projects. "Did you hear that he brought a street child to live in his house?" Wesley commented casually during business meetings. "I'm not judging his generosity, but is that a sign that he is making decisions based on emotional impulse rather than business logic?" These malicious whispers began to generate the desired results. Some important clients began to question discreetly the stability of Blake Enterprises, and 2 contracts that seemed guaranteed were suspended for re-evaluation. The situation became even more complicated when Dr. Eleanor Vance, the social worker responsible for child protection in the region, was informed by an anonymous source about Willow's irregular situation. Eleanor was a 55-year-old woman, rigid and distrustful, who had seen many cases of well-intentioned people who caused more harm than good to vulnerable children. When she appeared at the door of the Blake mansion on a Thursday afternoon, Harrison immediately realized that he would face a complex legal battle. "Mr. Blake," she said, showing her official identification, "we received information that there is a minor in an irregular situation residing on your property. I need to talk to the child and assess her living conditions." Willow, who was playing in the garden with some toys that Harrison had bought, immediately hid behind him when she saw the serious woman approaching. Her experience on the streets had taught her to distrust any adult who carried official authority. "I have nothing to hide," said Harrison calmly. "Willow is very well cared for here. She has food, clothes, medical care, and a lot of love." "That remains to be determined," replied Dr. Vance coldly. "Do you have documents of legal guardianship of this child? Have you gone through the qualification process for adoption? Do you have criminal records that I need to check?" The avalanche of bureaucracy hit Harrison like a tsunami. In his naivete, he had assumed that saving a child from the streets would be seen as a heroic act by everyone. He hadn't considered that the legal system might interpret his actions as kidnapping, or that his motivations would be questioned. I didn't know there were so many procedures," he admitted. "I thought I was simply helping a child who needed it." "The law exists to protect minors from adults who may have dubious intentions," explained Dr. Vance, studying Harrison with investigative eyes. "However noble your motivations may seem, you removed a child from her environment without following the appropriate legal protocols." Willow, realizing that something bad was happening, clung to Harrison's leg with desperate force. "Daddy Harrison, is she going to take me away? I don't want to go back to the streets. Please don't let her take me." The girl's plea touched even the hardened heart of Dr. Vance, But she maintained her professional posture. "No one is going to take you to the streets, honey. But we need to ensure that you are in a legal and safe environment." During the next 2 hours, Dr. Vance conducted a meticulous assessment of the situation. She interviewed Willow separately, inspected the girl's room, verified the medical care she was receiving, and asked a series of embarrassing questions to Harrison about his motivations and background. "Mr. Blake," she said finally, "while it is evident that the child is being well cared for physically, her legal situation is highly irregular. I will need to initiate a formal investigation process, which may result in the temporary removal of the minor until her situation is regularized." "Temporary for how long?" asked Harrison, feeling the panic grow in his chest. "That depends on many factors. First, we need to determine if there are biological relatives who can claim custody. Then you will need to go through a complete qualification process for adoption, which includes psychological evaluations, background checks, social study, and approval from a judge. That can take from 6 months to 2 years. The prospect of being separated from Willow for so long was unacceptable to Harrison. "And if she stays with me during this process, under supervision, if necessary?" Dr. Vance considered the possibility. "That is unusual, but not impossible. It would require judicial approval and regular supervision. Furthermore, any indication of irregularity would result in the immediate removal of the child." When the social worker finally left, leaving a pile of forms to be filled out and a date for appearance at a preliminary hearing, Harrison felt like he had been run over by a truck. Willow, perceiving his discouragement, approached and held his hand with her small fingers. "Daddy Harrison, you won't abandon me, will you? Like the other adults did?" The simple question renewed all of Harrison's determination. He looked into the girl's big, scared eyes and made a promise that would change his life forever. "Never, Willow. No matter what happens, no matter how many obstacles appear, I will never abandon you. We are a family now, and families don't separate." The legal battle that began after the visit from Dr. Vance consumed the following weeks like a voracious fire, burning the stability that Harrison had tried to build for Willow. The forms multiplied like a bureaucratic hydra. Each document filled out generated 3 new requirements. Each approval depended on 5 other authorizations, and each step of the process seemed to have been designed to discourage people with fewer resources or determination. Harrison hired the best family lawyer in the region, Dr. Franklin Ainsworth, an experienced man who had dealt with complex adoption cases for over 20 years. When Franklin analyzed the situation, his grave expression confirmed Harrison's worst fears. "We need to be realistic about the challenges we face," explained the lawyer in his office filled with legal codes and archived cases. "First, you removed a child from her original situation without following official protocols. Second, you are single from a legal point of view, since your wife clearly does not support the adoption. Third, we don't have complete documentation about the girl's history, which complicates any guardianship process." "But she was abandoned on the streets," protested Harrison. "I saved her from a terrible situation." "I understand, and I admire your compassion," replied Franklin patiently. "But the legal system doesn't work based on good intentions. We need to prove that you are the best possible caregiver for Willow, that there are no biological relatives with a legal right to her, and that your motivation is genuinely altruistic." While Harrison fought against the bureaucratic machine, Tiffany escalated her destructive tactics to an even crueler level. She had discreetly contacted a local journalist, Marcus Phillips, known for his sensationalist reporting on scandals involving wealthy people in the region. "I have an interesting story for you," she said, during a secret meeting at a cafe far from downtown. "My husband is having a nervous breakdown after a car accident. He brought a street child into our house and is talking about adopting her officially." Marcus's eyes gleamed with journalistic interest. That's an interesting human story. What's the negative angle? Harrison is making completely irrational decisions. He has abandoned the company, is spending fortunes on lawyers and doctors for this child, and is obsessed in a way that isn't healthy. Some clients are already questioning his mental stability. Tiffany had carefully prepared her narrative, mixing partial truths with malicious insinuations to create a story that seemed credible but that destroyed Harrison's reputation. "Do you have evidence of this instability?" asked Marcus, already smelling a juicy headline. "I have recordings of him talking obsessively about this child, photographs that show his erratic behavior, and I can present witnesses who confirm drastic changes in his personality." While his wife conspired to destroy him, Harrison faced even greater challenges at home. Willow's health was improving physically. She had gained 6 pounds in the last few weeks, and her cheeks were beginning to show a healthy, rosy color. But emotionally, she remained as fragile as glass. She had begun to exhibit behaviors that deeply worried Harrison. In addition to the conversations with Beatrice, she now obsessively drew dark figures on black paper using red and brown crayons. The drawings always showed a big house, threatening adult figures, and a small child hiding in dark corners. "Willow, can you tell me about your drawings?" asked Harrison gently, sitting next to her on the floor of the room. "They're not real drawings," she murmured, without lifting her eyes from the paper. "They're the bad memories that stay in my head and don't want to leave." "What kind of bad memories?" The girl stopped drawing and looked at Harrison with an expression that carried much more knowledge about suffering than any child should have. "Before living with Grandma Beatrice, I lived on a big farm. There was a man who yelled a lot and a woman who was always sad. They argued every night, and when they got very angry, they locked me in the dark room." Harrison's heart tightened upon hearing these revelations. "Were those your parents?" "I don't know," admitted Willow. "Grandma Beatrice brought me to live with her when I was very little. She said my parents couldn't take care of me, but she never explained why." Harrison began to realize that Willow's story was much more complex than he had imagined. The child had not been simply abandoned on the streets. She had a traumatic past that included possible family neglect and a previous removal from a toxic environment. This significantly complicated any legal process, since there could be biological relatives with legal rights over her. His concern intensified when he received an unexpected call from Dr. Franklin with disturbing news. "Harrison, we started the investigation into Willow's history, and we discovered something worrying. Apparently, she has living relatives who can claim her guardianship." "What relatives?" asked Harrison, feeling his stomach sink. "An aunt named Marilyn Sanders, sister of the deceased Beatrice. She lives in a neighboring town and, according to our investigators, is aware of Willow's existence. If she decides to claim guardianship, she will have legal priority over you." The revelation hit Harrison like lightning. After all the bureaucratic battles, after all the love and care he had invested in Willow, a stranger could simply appear and take her away legally. Why hasn't she looked for Willow before? "That's what we need to find out," replied Franklin. "But legally, biological kinship takes precedence over adoption by third parties, especially when the adoption process has not yet been officially approved." That night, Harrison couldn't sleep, tormented by the possibility of losing Willow. He walked to her room and found her awake, looking out the window at the stars. "Why aren't you sleeping, honey?" "I'm talking to Grandma Beatrice," she explained naturally. "She's worried. She said bad people want to take me away from you." Willow's ability to perceive tensions that adults tried to hide from her was simultaneously impressive and disturbing. "Who are these bad people?" "I don't know their names," she said, "but Grandma said they're people who don't really love me, who just want to hurt me or use me to get things." Harrison sat on the edge of the bed, struggling to find words that could console her without lying about the gravity of the situation. "Willow, no matter how many people show up, no matter what happens, I will always fight to protect you. Do you believe me?" She turned and looked at him with her big, serious eyes. "I believe you, Daddy Harrison, but Grandma Beatrice said that sometimes good people lose to bad people, even when they fight hard." The bitter wisdom in the voice of a 4-year-old made Harrison realize that he wasn't just fighting for Willow, he was fighting against a system that often failed to protect the most vulnerable. The next day, the situation worsened drastically when Marcus Phillips's first report was published in the local newspaper with the headline, "Millionaire Businessman in Psychological Crisis Brings Street Child to Mansion." The article, cleverly written to insinuate irregularities without making direct accusations, painted Harrison as an unstable man who was making dangerous decisions after a brain trauma. The consequences were immediate and devastating. 3 important clients cancelled contracts, his stock investments began to suffer due to rumors about his mental instability, and the bank where he kept his most important investments requested a meeting to discuss the security of his assets. Wesley, feigning concern, appeared at the office that afternoon with a proposal that completely revealed his true intentions. "Harrison, we need to talk seriously about the future of the company," he said, spreading newspapers and financial reports on the table. "The reports are causing irreparable damage to our reputation. Maybe it's time for you to step away temporarily. Let me manage operations until this situation resolves." The suggestion was made with false concern, but Harrison finally saw with complete clarity the conspiracy that was forming against him. Tiffany and Wesley had joined forces to destroy his credibility and take control of his fortune, using Willow as a pretext to question his sanity. The revelation about the conspiracy between Tiffany and Wesley hit Harrison like an avalanche, but instead of crushing him, it awakened in him a fierce determination that he didn't know he possessed. That same afternoon, he convened an emergency meeting at the construction company's office with all the important employees, determined to expose the betrayal before it caused irreversible damage to the company he had built with so much effort. "I want everyone to know that I am perfectly lucid and in full control of my mental faculties," declared Harrison to the room full of engineers, architects, and managers. "The malicious reports that you may have read are the result of a campaign orchestrated by people who want to benefit from my alleged instability." Wesley, who had arrived a few minutes late thinking that he would find Harrison in a state of panic, turned livid upon seeing that his plan had been discovered. He tried to maintain the facade, but his guilty expression betrayed him completely. "Harrison, no one is questioning your ability," he lied desperately. "We're just worried about the impact this personal situation may have on business." "Personal situation," repeated Harrison with irony. "You mean saving an innocent child from the streets, demonstrating compassion and humanity? If that's mental instability, then I'm proud to be unstable." The older employees, who had known Harrison for years and respected his integrity, began to realize that something much more serious was happening. Carl Mason, the chief engineer, spoke out in support of his boss. "Mr. Blake, we have all worked with you in moments of extreme pressure, and we have never seen anything that questioned your competence or judgment. If you say that there are people trying to harm you, we believe you." The support of the loyal employees strengthened Harrison's position, but he knew that the battle was just beginning. Wesley would not easily give up his plans to take control of the company, and Tiffany would continue her destructive tactics as long as she believed she could gain something from it. That night, when he arrived home, Harrison found a scene that broke his heart. Willow was hiding under the kitchen table, trembling and holding one of her dark drawings. Tiffany was in the living room, on the phone with someone, talking loudly about documenting erratic behaviors and evidence of instability. "Daddy Harrison!" Willow sighed upon seeing him, running into his arms. The angry woman was talking about taking me away. She said very ugly things about you on the phone. Harrison hugged the girl tightly, feeling his responsibility as a father grow even more. It wasn't just his own reputation or fortune that was at stake. It was the future and safety of an innocent child who had already suffered enough trauma for a lifetime. "Tiffany," he said in a controlled but firm voice when she hung up the phone, "I need you to leave this house today." His wife turned around with an expression of false indignation. "How dare you kick me out of my own house?" "This is not your house," Harrison corrected icily. "This house was bought exclusively with my money. It's registered only in my name. And you lost any right to be here when you decided to conspire against me and scare an innocent child." Tiffany realized that she had underestimated her husband's determination. For years, she had managed to manipulate him through charm and emotional blackmail, but something fundamental had changed in him since the accident. "Harrison, be reasonable," she tried, changing her tactic to a false vulnerability. "We've been married for 3 years. We built a life together. Are you really going to destroy our marriage because of some strange child?" "I'm not destroying our marriage," he replied calmly. "You already did that when you chose to betray my trust and conspire against me. I'm just recognizing a reality that I should have realized a long time ago." 2 hours later, Tiffany left the mansion carrying her designer suitcases, but not before making a threat that completely revealed her vengeful character. "You're going to regret this, Harrison. I'm going to make you lose everything, the company, the fortune, and especially that girl you love so much. When I'm done with you, not even your safest cryptocurrencies will be left." After his wife left, Harrison could finally focus completely on protecting Willow and preparing for the legal battles that he knew were coming. The next day, he received a call that would dramatically change the course of his fight. Monica Tate, an independent social worker who had heard about the case, offered her help. "Mr. Blake," she said in her professional but compassionate voice, "I have been working with cases of traumatized children for 15 years, and I have rarely seen a situation as complex as Willow's. I would like to offer my services to help you navigate the legal system." Monica was a black woman in her 40s, with a degree in social psychology, who had dedicated her career to impossible cases involving children in extreme situations. Unlike Dr. Vance, who saw everything through the prism of bureaucracy, Monica understood that sometimes the most humane solutions were also the most legal. "Why do you want to help?" asked Harrison, distrustful after all the betrayals he had suffered recently. "Because I know the real story of Willow," revealed Monica, surprising him completely. "I was working in the region when she was removed from the farm where she lived with her biological parents. It was a horrific case of neglect and abuse that marked my career." Harrison felt his blood run cold. "Can you tell me what happened to her?" Monica took a deep breath before revealing details that would explain many of Willow's traumatic behaviors. Her parents owned a small farm that was going bankrupt due to debts with loan sharks. The father became alcoholic and violent, while the mother developed severe depression. Willow, who was only 2 years old at the time, was often locked alone in dark rooms while they argued or were absent for days at a time. How did she end up with Beatrice? Beatrice was a neighbor who reported the situation to the authorities. When we arrived at the farm, we found Willow malnourished, dirty, and in a state of shock. The parents had disappeared during the early morning, leaving the child completely alone. Beatrice asked to stay with her temporarily, and since we couldn't locate the parents or other relatives, we allowed it. "And the aunt that the lawyer mentioned?" "Marilyn," said Monica with a somber expression, "is not a safe option for Willow. She's Beatrice's sister, but she has a history of involvement with drugs and abusive relationships. She is only interested in guardianship now because she heard that a rich man is willing to adopt the girl." The revelation that Marilyn had financial, not maternal motivations, gave Harrison new hope. If he could prove that she did not offer a safe environment for Willow, he might be able to legally block her claim of guardianship. "Do you have documentation of all this?" he asked anxiously. "I have detailed reports on the entire family situation, including psychological evaluations of the biological parents and the aunt. More importantly, I have evidence that Willow has developed a healthy emotional bond with you in a very short period, which is rare for children with her level of trauma." At that moment, Willow appeared at the door of the office, carrying a new drawing. But this time, to everyone's surprise, it wasn't a dark image of fear and violence. It was a colorful drawing showing a yellow house with blue windows, a tall man smiling, a little girl holding hands with him, and in the sky, a female figure with grey hair that clearly represented Beatrice, watching the scene with approval. "Look," said Willow proudly, "I drew our happy family. Grandma Beatrice said she's happy because now I have someone who really loves me." Monica observed the drawing with professional interest. "This is a significant breakthrough. Traumatized children rarely express hope and security through art. This is clear evidence that she's recovering emotionally." But the joy of the moment was cut short when the phone rang with news that would change everything again. It was Franklin, with a devastating update on the legal proceedings. "Harrison, I have bad news. Marilyn Sanders has officially filed for custody, and the judge has ruled that Willow must be removed from your home temporarily while the case is decided. The order will be enforced tomorrow morning." The news of the court order hit Harrison like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs and making his legs wobble. Willow, with her childlike ability to sense shifts in the emotional environment, immediately picked up on the fact that something terrible was happening. Her big eyes filled with terror, and she clung to Harrison's leg with a desperate strength that broke everyone's heart. "Daddy Harrison, what's happening?" "Why are you so sad?" she asked in her trembling little voice, already suspecting the answer she feared most. Harrison knelt down to her level, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. "How do you explain to a 4-year-old that the legal system, which is supposed to protect her, is about to snatch her away from the only safe home she's known in over a year?" "Sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "some people who don't know us very well think it might be better for you to stay somewhere else for a few days, just until we sort everything out in court." "No!" Willow cried, her small body trembling with fear. "I don't want to go anywhere else. I want to stay with you. I promise I'll be really good. I promise I won't be any trouble." The girl's desperate plea echoed through the house like a lament that touched even Monica's professional heart. She had witnessed hundreds of traumatic separations during her career, but rarely had she seen such a genuine bond between a child and her caregiver being shattered by legal bureaucracy. "Mr. Blake," Franklin said over the phone, his voice laden with professional frustration, "we can still try for an emergency appeal, but it will be very difficult. The judge is being pressured because the case has gained media attention, and he wants to avoid criticism for allowing an irregular situation to continue." Harrison closed his eyes, feeling the weight of all the conspiracies that had aligned against him and Willow. Tiffany and Wesley had managed to create a perfect storm of public distrust and legal pressure that now threatened to destroy the only truly important thing in his life. That night, which everyone knew might be the last they would spend together for a long time, Harrison did everything he could to create happy memories for Willow. They watched cartoons together, made popcorn in the kitchen, and he read her all the children's stories he had bought over the past few weeks. But nothing could completely mask the atmosphere of impending farewell that hung over the house. At 3 a.m, Harrison was awakened by sobs coming from Willow's room. When he went in, he found the girl sitting up in bed, talking intently to her deceased grandmother about the desperate situation. "Grandma Beatrice, please tell me it's not going to happen again," she pleaded through tears. "I can't be alone again." "I'm not as strong as you thought I was." Harrison sat on the edge of the bed, his own voice almost failing when he tried to comfort her. "You're the bravest person I know, Willow, and no matter where they take you, I'm going to keep fighting to bring you back. This separation is temporary, I promise." "But what if the bad people win? What if I can never come home again?" The girl's questions echoed his own deepest fears. Harrison knew he was facing powerful forces: Tiffany's greed, Wesley's ambition, Eleanor's bureaucratic rigidity, and now Marilyn's dubious motivations. Each of them had their own reasons for separating him from Willow, and together they formed a formidable coalition against a man who only wanted to protect an innocent child. The next morning, at 9 o'clock sharp, Eleanor arrived accompanied by 2 bailiffs and a temporary social worker. Willow, who had spent almost the entire night sleepless, hid behind Harrison when she saw the official group approaching the door. "Mr. Blake," Eleanor said in her usual bureaucratic tone, "I regret that it has come to this, but I must comply with the court order. The minor will be temporarily transferred to a specialized foster home until the custody issue is resolved." "Please," Harrison pleaded, "let me take her personally." "She's already terrified. Don't make this even more traumatic." Eleanor considered the request for a moment before agreeing. "Very well, but one of the officers will accompany you, and you will only have 15 minutes for the farewell at the destination." The trip to the foster home was the longest and most painful of Harrison's life. Willow remained glued to his side in the back seat of the car, holding his hand with desperate strength and whispering promises that she would be a very good girl if he could only take her back home. The Hope Haven foster home was a well-intentioned but overburdened institution run by Sister Lucia, a 60-year-old nun who had dedicated her life to caring for abandoned children. When she saw Willow's emotional state, she immediately understood that she was dealing with an exceptional situation. "This child has clearly developed a very strong bond with you," she observed to Harrison. "Separations like this can cause significant psychological regression. Please take good care of her," Harrison pleaded, kneeling down to hug Willow one last time. "Remember that I love you, that you're my daughter at heart, and that I'm going to do everything in my power to bring you back." "I know, Daddy Harrison," Willow murmured against his chest. "Grandma Beatrice said that sometimes things get really bad before they get good. She'll take care of me until you can come and get me." When Harrison finally had to leave, leaving Willow in Sister Lucia's comforting arms, he felt as if an essential part of his soul was being torn away. For the first time since the accident that had changed his life, he questioned whether he had the strength to continue fighting against all the adversities that were piling up against him. In the following days, Willow's absence transformed the mansion into a mausoleum of memories. Harrison wandered through the empty rooms, unable to concentrate on work or any other activity. His wealth continued to deteriorate due to the malicious rumors spread by Tiffany and Wesley, but that seemed insignificant compared to the pain of being separated from his adopted daughter. It was during these dark days that Monica brought a discovery that would completely change the course of the legal battle. "Harrison, I got something that may save Willow," she said on the phone, her voice full of contained excitement. "I found evidence that Marilyn Sanders has a criminal record that she hid from the authorities." "What kind of evidence?" "Police records from 3 different cities showing involvement with small-scale drug trafficking and association with violent men. More importantly, I found that she already lost custody of 2 of her own children for neglect. She's not a suitable caregiver, and I can prove it legally." For the first time in days, Harrison felt a spark of hope rekindle in his chest. "Is that enough to cancel her custody petition?" "Better than that," Monica replied. "It's enough to expedite your adoption process and prove that you're the only safe option for Willow. But we need to act quickly because I heard that Marilyn is planning to remove the girl from the foster home later this week." The race against time had begun, but now Harrison had powerful allies and concrete evidence to fight with. Meanwhile, at Hope Haven, Willow had completely stopped eating and spent her days sitting at the window, watching the entrance of the institution in the hope of seeing Harrison arrive to pick her up. Sister Lucia, concerned about the girl's depressive state, had allowed her to call Harrison every night, brief but essential conversations that kept the emotional connection between them alive. "Daddy Harrison," she said during one of those nightly calls, "when are you going to be able to come and get me? The other kids here are nice, but I just want to go home." "Very soon, sweetheart," he promised, praying that it was true. "Just a few more days, and then we'll be together forever." The discovery of the evidence against Marilyn Sanders triggered a frenetic race against time that consumed all of Harrison's energy and his legal team. Franklin worked around the clock compiling documents, while Monica used all her professional contacts to expedite background checks that would normally take weeks. But it was when they began to investigate Marilyn Sanders' past more deeply that they discovered something that completely changed the nature of the entire legal battle. "Harrison," Monica said during an urgent call on Thursday morning, "you need to sit down for this. We've uncovered a connection that explains a lot about Marilyn Sanders' motives." "What kind of connection?" "She's not acting alone. I discovered that someone is financing her legal costs and promising significant payment if she gets custody of Willow, and you'll never guess who that person is." Harrison's stomach clenched with a terrible premonition. "Who?" "Tiffany. Your ex-wife is using Marilyn Sanders as a puppet to snatch Willow away from you. The plan is for Marilyn to receive temporary custody and then voluntarily hand the girl over to a family chosen by Tiffany, probably some couple she can manipulate and who will give her access to the child." The revelation was like being struck by lightning. Tiffany had elevated her revenge to a level of cruelty that Harrison had never imagined possible. It wasn't enough to destroy his professional reputation and try to steal his company. She wanted to use an innocent child as the ultimate weapon of psychological torture. "How did you find out about this?" "A private investigator I hired managed to photograph Tiffany and Marilyn Sanders meeting at a hotel in a neighboring town. We have photos of them handing over money and documents, as well as partial recordings of conversations where they discuss their agreement." Franklin, who had arrived at the office during the call, took the phone from Harrison. "Monica, is this evidence admissible in court?" "Absolutely. We have proof of conspiracy to defraud the adoption system, bribery of a witness, and misuse of the legal process for purposes of personal revenge. This not only cancels Marilyn Sanders' petition, but could result in criminal charges against both of them." That same day, while the lawyers rushed to file an emergency petition, Harrison received a call that made him run straight to the hospital. Sister Lucia's voice was thick with concern. "Mr. Blake, you need to come here immediately. Willow fainted during lunch, and we can't wake her up." Harrison drove through the city streets like a man possessed, his heart beating so erratically that he feared he would have another cardiac episode. When he arrived at the hospital, he found Willow admitted to the pediatrics ward, connected to medical equipment that monitored her vital signs. Dr. Carolyn Shaw, the attending pediatrician, explained the situation with grave concern. "The girl is suffering from what we call severe childhood depression with physical symptoms. She hasn't been eating properly for several days, she's not sleeping, and her body simply can't sustain the emotional stress anymore. It's an extreme reaction, but not uncommon in children who have suffered multiple traumas of abandonment." "Is she going to be okay?" Harrison asked, holding Willow's cold little hand. "Physically, yes, with proper care. But emotionally, she desperately needs stability and security. The separation from you is causing dangerous psychological regression. If this continues, there may be permanent consequences for her development." That night, Harrison remained by Willow's bedside in the hospital, watching her weak and irregular breathing. Even unconscious, she occasionally mumbled fragmented words about wanting to go home and being afraid of being left alone again. It was evident that her little heart couldn't endure another traumatic separation. Around 3 in the morning, Willow finally woke up and found Harrison holding her hand. Her eyes filled with tears of relief at seeing him, but also with confusion about where she was and why she felt so weak. "Daddy Harrison, did you come to get me?" she murmured in a hoarse voice. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'll always be here when you need me," he promised, fighting back his own tears. "I got very sick because I missed you," she admitted. "Grandma Beatrice said that my heart was very sad, and that's why my body got sick too." The devastating simplicity with which a 4-year-old described her depression made Harrison realize that he needed to accelerate his legal efforts even further. Every day of separation was causing emotional damage that could affect Willow forever. The next morning, Franklin arrived at the hospital with news that changed the entire legal landscape once and for all. "Harrison, we got more than we expected. The judge not only cancelled Marilyn Sanders' custody petition, but issued an arrest warrant for her and Tiffany for conspiracy and fraud. Does that mean Willow can come home with me?" "Better than that," Franklin said with a triumphant smile. The judge was so outraged by the manipulation of the legal system that he decided to expedite your adoption process. "With the evidence we presented about the emotional bond between you and her current medical condition, he will sign the final adoption papers later this week." Harrison could hardly believe what he was hearing. After months of legal battles, conspiracies, and painful separation, it finally seemed that justice was being served. But his joy was tempered by concern for Willow's current state. "What about what she's been through? The doctors said there may be permanent damage." "That's why I'm going to recommend specialized therapy in childhood trauma," Franklin said. "I know an excellent psychologist, Dr. Lillian Moss, who works specifically with cases like Willow's. With love, patience, and proper treatment, resilient children like her can recover completely." When Harrison told Willow that she could come home for good, that no one would ever try to separate them again, and that she would officially be his adopted daughter, the transformation was immediate and dramatic. Color returned to her pale little face. Her eyes regained their sparkle, and for the first time in days, she asked for food. "Daddy Harrison," she said, holding his face between her tiny hands. "Grandma Beatrice was right. She said that after the very bad things, the very good things always come." "Your grandmother was very wise," he agreed. "And now, we're going to start our life together for real, without any more separations, without any more fear." 3 days later, when Willow was discharged from the hospital, Harrison took her straight home, where he had prepared a surprise that symbolized their new beginning as an official family. He had completely transformed her room, painting the walls soft yellow, her favorite color, and filling the space with toys, books, and above all, photos of the two of them together in frames scattered everywhere. "Now it's officially your home forever," he said, watching the pure joy on Willow's face as she explored her new room. "And you're officially my daddy forever," she replied, hugging him with all the strength her little body could muster. That night, for the first time since they had met, both slept soundly, knowing that nothing and no one could ever separate the family they had chosen for each other. But what Harrison didn't yet know was that the traumatic events of the past months had awakened something extraordinary in Willow, a capacity for perception and intuition that would soon prove crucial in uncovering a secret about her own past that would change everything once again. 6 months after Willow's official adoption, a precious tranquility had finally settled into the Blake mansion. The girl had recovered remarkably, both physically and emotionally, gaining healthy weight and developing a vibrant personality that charmed everyone around her. Her sessions with Dr. Lillian Moss were showing extraordinary progress, and she rarely had nightmares or conversations with invisible figures anymore. Harrison had also grown stronger. His cardiac health stabilized through a new experimental treatment, and his company had fully recovered from the damage caused by Tiffany and Wesley's conspiracies. What surprised him most was discovering that facing all those adversities had made his business acumen even sharper, and his investments in stocks and cryptocurrencies were yielding record profits. It was on a Saturday morning, while Willow was playing in the garden and Harrison was organizing some documents in his office, that she made a seemingly innocent observation that would trigger the biggest revelation of their lives. "Daddy Harrison," she said, coming into the office with a new drawing in her hands. "Why do you have the same mark on your arm as me?" Harrison looked up from the papers, confused. "What mark, sweetheart?" Willow pulled up the sleeve of her t-shirt, revealing a small crescent moon-shaped birthmark on her right forearm. Then she pointed to Harrison's arm, where an identical mark was visible just below where the sleeve of his dress shirt ended. "This little mark here, Grandma Beatrice always said it was special, that it meant I was protected by angels." Harrison's heart stopped for a moment. He looked at his own birthmark, something he had always considered just a genetic quirk without importance, and then at the identical mark on Willow's arm. The shapes were absolutely the same. Same size, same position, same crescent moon outline. "Willow," he said carefully, trying to remain calm, "do you remember anyone on the farm where you lived before who had a mark like this?" The girl frowned, concentrating on memories she had tried to forget for so long. "Yes, the man who fought with the sad woman. He had the same little mark, but he got very angry when I asked him about it." A sensation of vertigo washed over Harrison. The possibility that was beginning to form in his mind was so impossible, so improbable, that he initially tried to reject it. But the physical evidence was there, undeniable, staring him in the face. "Honey, can you tell me more about this man? What did he look like?" Willow sat down on the floor next to Harrison's chair, as she always did when she was going to tell him something important. "He was tall, like you. He had dark hair, like you. And he got very sad when he drank that stinky liquid that made him yell at everyone." The details Willow was describing began to form an image that made Harrison's blood run cold. He picked up the phone with trembling hands and called Monica, asking her to come to his house immediately with all the files on Willow's biological family. An hour later, Monica arrived carrying a bulky folder of documents that she had kept from her previous investigation. When Harrison explained his suspicion, she initially showed skepticism, but upon seeing the identical birthmarks, her expression changed to one of professional shock. "Harrison, if your theory is correct, this would explain a lot about the self-destructive behavior of Willow's biological father," she said, quickly flipping through the reports. "Here it is. Ethan Blake, 27 years old at the time, owner of the failed farm. Blake Harrison, you have the same last name." "That doesn't prove anything," Harrison argued, but his voice trembled with emotion. "Blake is a common last name." "But look at this," Monica said, pointing to a notation in the psychological report. "It says here that Ethan spoke obsessively about having lost his younger brother years ago, and that this was a constant source of his depression and alcoholism." Harrison felt his legs weaken. He did indeed have an older brother, Ethan, who had left home when Harrison was only 12 years old after a violent argument with their parents. He had never heard from him again and assumed that he had built a completely different life elsewhere. "Monica," he said in an almost inaudible voice, "do you have any more information about where Ethan is now?" She leafed through a few more documents before finding what she was looking for. "According to our most recent records, he was admitted to a rehabilitation clinic for alcoholism and depression 2 years ago, after the farm was lost. It's at the Serenity Clinic in Lancaster." Willow, who had been quiet throughout the adults' conversation, suddenly spoke with the intuitive wisdom that always characterized her. "Daddy Harrison, are you sad because you found out that the angry man from the farm is your brother? Grandma Beatrice always said that sometimes people from the same family get lost, But love always finds a way to bring them together again. The girl's simple words hit Harrison with devastating force. If Ethan really was his brother, that meant that Willow was his biological niece, that he had been guided by some greater force to save her that day on the road, that all the instant emotional connection he had felt with her had deeper roots than simple compassion. "I need to go see him," Harrison said, making a decision that he knew would change their lives forever. "I need to know the truth." The next day, Harrison made the trip to Lancaster accompanied by Monica and, against everyone's advice, took Willow with him. She had insisted on going, saying that Grandma Beatrice had appeared in her dreams the night before to say that it was important for her to be present. The Serenity Clinic was an institution specializing in severe cases of chemical dependency and mental disorders. When they arrived, they were greeted by Dr. Abigail Flores, the psychiatrist responsible for Ethan's treatment. "Mr. Blake is in a very fragile state," she explained. "He has frequent episodes of extreme guilt related to abandoning his daughter and has developed severe depression. Any emotional shock could be dangerous for him." But when Ethan appeared in the visiting room, a 32-year-old man who looked like he was 50, too thin, prematurely grey hair, deep-set eyes full of pain, there was no doubt in anyone's mind. He was a version of Harrison destroyed by suffering. The brothers recognized each other immediately, and Ethan broke down in tears at seeing not only the brother he thought he had lost forever, but also the daughter he had abandoned because he couldn't take care of her properly. "Harrison," he murmured, as if he were seeing a ghost. "Is it really you?" "Hi, Ethan," Harrison replied, his own voice thick with emotion. "I came to bring you someone very special." When Ethan saw Willow hiding shyly behind Harrison, his tears turned into violent sobs. "Willow, my little princess, can you forgive me for being such a bad father, for leaving you alone when you needed me most?" To everyone's surprise, Willow calmly approached Ethan and took his hand with her tiny hands. "I forgive you, Daddy Ethan. Grandma Beatrice taught me that sometimes people get very sick inside, but that doesn't mean they're bad." The reunion was emotionally devastating for everyone present, but it also brought a sense of completeness that none of them had experienced before. Finally, all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. Harrison had saved not just a strange child, but his own niece. Ethan had lost his daughter, but she had found safety with the only family member who could take care of her properly. And Willow had gained not only a loving adoptive father, but an extended biological family that could finally function in a healthy way. "Ethan," Harrison said when he finally managed to control his emotions, "when you're well, I want you to come live with us. Willow needs to know her biological father, and I need to get my brother back." The process of Ethan's recovery and reintegration of the family was much more complex than Harrison had initially imagined. In the months following the emotional reunion at the clinic, he discovered that healing years of trauma, guilt, and self-destruction required much more than love and goodwill. Ethan had developed a severe case of clinical depression, aggravated by his overwhelming guilt for having abandoned Willow when she needed him most. Dr. Abigail Flores explained that he would have panic episodes whenever he saw small children, constantly reliving the night he had left his daughter alone on the farm while running away from his financial problems. "He carries a guilt that is literally killing him inside," the psychiatrist explained to Harrison during one of his weekly visits to the clinic. "Ethan has convinced himself that he is a monster who does not deserve forgiveness or happiness. It will take a long time and intensive therapy to rebuild his self-esteem." Willow, with her extraordinary capacity for emotional understanding, instinctively perceived her biological father's suffering and developed an angelic patience with him. During her visits to the clinic, she brought drawings that she had made especially for Ethan. No longer the dark images of her first months with Harrison, but colorful drawings showing a reunited and happy family. "Daddy Ethan," she said during each visit, "Grandma Beatrice told me that you're not a bad person. You were just very sick in your heart, just like I was when I thought Daddy Harrison wasn't going to be able to come and get me back." The girl's simple words often made Ethan cry, but they were tears of relief rather than despair. For the first time in years, he was beginning to believe that perhaps there was hope of redemption for the terrible mistakes he had made. While Ethan struggled with his recovery, Harrison faced his own challenges adapting to the new family reality. His company had become even more successful after he had overcome Tiffany and Wesley's conspiracies. Apparently, adversity had sharpened his business instincts and made his investment decisions more accurate. His assets in bitcoins had appreciated dramatically, and his stock dividends reached figures he had never imagined possible. But all this material wealth seemed secondary compared to the emotional complexity of rebuilding family relationships that had been shattered by years of separation and trauma. "Harrison," Willow said one night as he was putting her to bed, "why were you and Daddy Ethan separated for so long? Did you fight the way he fought with the sad woman on the farm?" It was a question that Harrison had feared, but knew that he would eventually have to face. "Not exactly, honey. Sometimes brothers grow up and choose different paths in life. Ethan wanted to do things that our parents didn't approve of, and instead of talking about it, he simply left. But now you can talk and work everything out, right?" The pure hope in Willow's voice made Harrison realize that she saw the situation with a simplicity that the adults had complicated unnecessarily. To her, family meant love and forgiveness, no matter how much pain had happened in the past. 6 months after the discovery that Ethan was his brother, Dr. Abigail authorized him to make supervised visits to Harrison's house as part of his social reintegration therapy. The first of these visits was emotionally charged for everyone involved. Ethan arrived visibly nervous, his hands trembling as he observed the mansion where his daughter had found the stability and love that he had never been able to offer. "It's a beautiful house," he murmured to Harrison, "much better than anything I could have given her." "It's not about money or the size of the house," Harrison replied gently. "It's about love and security. And now that you're recovering, you can offer those things too." During that visit, something extraordinary happened. Willow took Ethan by the hand and led him to see all the rooms of the house, explaining excitedly where she played, where she ate her meals, where she drew her pictures. But it was when they reached her room that the real healing began to happen. "This is my room," she said proudly, "but look what Daddy Harrison made for you." On the wall opposite her bed, Harrison had hung an enlarged photograph that Willow had drawn, showing 3 figures holding hands, her in the middle, Harrison on one side, and Ethan on the other. Above them, a female figure with grey hair that represented Beatrice watched the scene with approval. Ethan was silent for several minutes, contemplating the drawing that represented the family that his daughter dreamed of having. When he finally managed to speak, his voice was filled with transforming emotion. "Willow, do you really forgive me for everything I did wrong? For having abandoned you when you needed me most?" "I already told you yes, Daddy Ethan," she replied with infinite patience. "Grandma Beatrice explains everything to me in dreams. She said that you were lost for a while, but that love always finds a way to bring people back home." It was at that moment that Ethan finally understood that his daughter had developed an emotional wisdom that transcended her young age. All the guilt and self-punishment he carried began to dissolve before the genuine and unconditional forgiveness that she offered. In the following months, Ethan made remarkable progress in his recovery. He began working as an assistant at Harrison's construction company, discovering that he had a natural aptitude for managing smaller projects. More importantly, he gradually developed a healthy relationship with Willow, not trying to replace Harrison as the main father figure, but finding his own role as a loving biological father who was finally present for his daughter. "It's interesting how everything connected," observed Dr. Lillian during a family session. "Harrison saved Willow, who in turn saved Ethan through forgiveness, who in turn helped Harrison understand the true meaning of family. You have formed a cycle of mutual healing. But it was during a private conversation between the brothers that the true depth of the transformation was revealed. "Ethan," Harrison said one night as they watched Willow play in the garden, "I need to confess something to you. In the beginning, when I found Willow, I thought I was saving her. But now I realize that she actually saved us all." Ethan nodded, understanding perfectly. "She gave me a reason to live again, a chance at redemption that I thought I had lost forever. And you gave me back my brother and my dignity. You know what impresses me most," continued Harrison. "All my wealth, all my investments, all the money I've accumulated over the years, none of it compares to the value of having a real family." Ethan smiled, a genuine expression of happiness that Harrison hadn't seen on his brother's face since childhood. Beatrice really chose well when she decided to take care of Willow. It was as if she knew that our little girl would be the link that would bring us back to each other. That night, when Willow asked both Harrison and Ethan to read her a story before bed, the three snuggled together in her small bed, creating a family image that none of them had imagined possible just a year before. "Daddy Harrison and Daddy Ethan," she said before falling asleep, "do you think Grandma Beatrice is happy seeing our family together?" "I'm sure she is," they both replied in unison, finally understanding that sometimes the most beautiful endings arise from the most painful beginnings. 2 years after the reunion that changed their lives forever, the Blake family had found a harmonious balance that seemed almost magical to those who watched from the outside. It was a sunny December morning when Willow, now 6 years old and radiant with health and happiness, made an announcement that surprised everyone during breakfast. "Daddy Harrison and Daddy Ethan," she said, with the seriousness that she sometimes displayed when she had something important to share. "Grandma Beatrice came to visit me in my dream last night, and she said there's a very special surprise waiting for our family." Harrison and Ethan exchanged amused glances. In recent months, Beatrice's dream visits had become less frequent, usually appearing only when something significant was about to happen in Willow's life. Both had learned to pay attention to the girl's extraordinary intuitions, which often proved surprisingly accurate. "What kind of surprise, my princess?" asked Ethan, who had fully recovered and was now working as a project manager at the construction company, demonstrating a natural competence that surprised even Harrison. "She didn't want to tell me everything," Willow admitted, "but she said it has to do with someone very special who's going to arrive in our life very soon." That afternoon, while Willow was playing in the garden and Ethan was reviewing budgets in the office, Harrison received a call that initially confused him, but that would soon reveal itself as the surprise that Beatrice had mentioned through her granddaughter's dreams. "Mr. Blake?" said an unknown female voice. "My name is Giselle Flores. I'm a social worker from Harrisburg. I'm calling because we have a 73-year-old woman here who insists on speaking with you. She says she's related to a girl named Willow who lives with you." Harrison's heart raced. "What woman? What's her name?" "Beatrice Sanders. She appeared in our office yesterday, very agitated, saying that she urgently needs to find her great-granddaughter. According to her, there was a terrible misunderstanding and everyone thought she had passed away. But in reality, she had been hospitalized in a coma for almost 3 years." The revelation hit Harrison like a lightning bolt. Beatrice Sanders, the grandmother that Willow believed had gone to heaven, whose memories had been her source of comfort during the most difficult times, was alive. "That's impossible," Harrison murmured. "Willow told me that her grandmother had died when she was 3 years old. Apparently, there was a mix-up at the hospital where she was hospitalized," Giselle explained. "Beatrice suffered a severe stroke and was in a vegetative state for years. Since she didn't have any documents when she was found, and no one knew her real identity, she was registered as an unidentified patient. Only when she woke up last month was she able to explain who she was and began searching for Willow desperately." Harrison felt dizzy with the magnitude of this revelation. How to tell Willow that the most important person in her childhood, whom she believed to have lost forever, was alive and looking for her. "Mr. Blake," Giselle continued, "Mrs. Sanders is very fragile physically, but mentally she's lucid. She told me detailed stories about Willow that only someone very close could know. There's no doubt that she's really the girl's grandmother. Can she come here? Or would you prefer that we take Willow there? We think it's best that you come first, alone, to assess the situation." Beatrice is anxious, but she also understands that for a small child, discovering that someone she thought was dead is actually alive can be traumatic. Harrison agreed to travel to Harrisburg the next day, but he knew that he wouldn't be able to hide from Willow that something extraordinary was happening. When he got home that night, she immediately noticed his emotional agitation. "Daddy Harrison, you're very happy and very nervous at the same time," she observed with her keen perception. "Does this have to do with Grandma Beatrice's surprise?" "Maybe it does, sweetheart," he admitted, deciding to be honest. "Tomorrow, I need to make an important trip, and when I come back, we may have very special news." The next day, when Harrison arrived at the social service center in Harrisburg, he was led to a small room where an elderly woman was sitting in a wheelchair, looking anxiously out the window. Even weakened by age and illness, he immediately recognized the gentle eyes that Willow had inherited. "Mr. Blake?" Beatrice said, with a trembling but determined voice. "Please tell me that my little Willow is okay. During all those years in the hospital, even when I couldn't move or speak, I dreamed about her every day." Harrison knelt down next to the wheelchair, too emotional to trust his own voice. "She's more than okay, Mrs. Sanders. She's a beautiful, intelligent, brave little girl who talks about you every day with so much love." Tears streamed down Beatrice's wrinkled face. "I always knew that something had happened to me, that I hadn't simply left her alone. When I finally managed to communicate in the hospital and explain who I was, the first thing I asked was to search for my Willow." "Mrs. Sanders," Harrison said carefully, "you need to know that a lot has happened in these years. Willow has gone through very difficult times, but now she has a family that loves her very much. She has two dads, me and my brother Ethan, who is her biological father." "Ethan," Beatrice repeated, her eyes widening in surprise. "Ethan Blake? Willow's father? Did you know him?" "Of course I knew him. I knew from the beginning that you were brothers." Ethan talked about Harrison constantly, even when he was drunk and depressed. He hated himself for having abandoned his younger brother, just as he hated himself for not being able to take care of his own daughter. The revelation that Beatrice already knew the whole family story brought a sense of cosmic completeness that Harrison could barely process. It was as if all the pieces of a universal puzzle were finally falling into place. 3 days later, when Harrison returned home accompanied by Beatrice and Giselle, he had carefully prepared Willow for the reunion. Even so, when the girl saw her grandmother in the wheelchair in the living room, she stood still for several seconds, as if she were seeing a miracle materialize before her eyes. "Grandma Beatrice?" she whispered, hardly believing it. "Is it really you?" "It's me, my little star," Beatrice replied with a voice thick with emotion. "Forgive me for taking so long to come back to you." Willow ran into her grandmother's arms with all the speed that her little legs allowed, and when they hugged, there wasn't a person in the room who wasn't crying. Ethan, who had come running from the office when Harrison called to tell him about the miracle, was also deeply moved to meet the woman who had taken care of his daughter when he had failed to do so. "Mrs. Sanders," he said with a voice full of gratitude, "thank you for taking care of Willow when I failed as a father. Thank you for being the mother she needed when I was too lost to be the father she deserved." "You didn't fail, Ethan," Beatrice replied gently. "You were sick, just like I got sick. But look, our family has found each other again, even stronger and more united than before." In the following months, Beatrice moved permanently into the Blake mansion, where a room on the ground floor was specially adapted to her needs. Despite her limited physical condition, she brought a wisdom and a loving presence that definitively completed the family that fate had reunited through coincidences that seemed miraculous. On a Sunday afternoon, exactly 3 years after the accident that had changed everything, the entire family was gathered in the garden. Harrison had taught Willow how to ride a bike, and she pedaled proudly around the lawn, while Ethan followed her running alongside, making sure she didn't fall. Beatrice watched from the porch, smiling with a happiness that seemed to illuminate her entire face. "You know something, honey?" Harrison said, sitting down next to Beatrice as they watched the perfect family scene. "Sometimes I think that accident was the best thing that ever happened to me." "It wasn't an accident, my son," Beatrice replied with a mysterious smile. "It was destiny making all the people who love each other meet at the right time." Willow always knew that. That's why she never doubted that everything was going to be all right in the end. That night, when Willow finally fell asleep between Harrison and Ethan in the big bed in the living room, surrounded by the love of a family that had been reunited through suffering, forgiveness, and everyday miracles, Beatrice whispered a prayer of gratitude for the mysterious paths that had brought them all back to each other. The girl who had saved a stranger on the road had unknowingly saved an entire lost family, proving that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness can completely rewrite the destiny of all the people involved. If you enjoyed this wonderful story, please comment, giving a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.